Hi, everyone, and welcome to Fireside Chats with Erin, a GGC podcast. I am your host, Erin Gowerluck, and we have a special episode today as we welcome you to Halifax, Nova Scotia, where we're at the Marriott Harbourfront. And I am joined today by the Greenwashing of Canada Board of Directors, who's here with us in the room, and members from across the country for our annual summer meeting. The topic of today's conversation is food in flux, the challenges facing Canada's agriculture over the next 5 years. And my guest didn't have to travel very far to be with us today. Dr. Sylvain Charlebois is joining me. He is the Dean of the Faculty of Management at Dalhousie University here in Halifax and is a professor in food distribution and policy in the Faculty of Agriculture. His current research interests lie in the broad area of food distribution, security, and safety. Sylvain, you are one of the first guests on our podcast, and you're back again with me here live for what is our 24th episode of Fireside Chats. So thank you very much for coming back. It's nice to do this with you in person.
In face-to-face, absolutely, yeah.
Yesterday, we had an opportunity, all of our group did, to tour Alexander Keith's brewery, and they're, along with Beer Canada, one of the sponsors for our podcast today. And our members had an opportunity to sample some of their products. Are you a beer drinker?
Of course.
What are some of your
not this morning, but typically, yes.
No, that was Beers with Brandon yesterday. Today we're drinking coffee. What are some of your local favorites?
Well, I'm a big fan of microbreweries, and as in many provinces, we do have some great microbreweries here. And I there's probably two or three of them that I could name that really are on top of our list. My wife and I would say 9 Locks over in Dartmouth. Good pick. Also Garrison, and they're actually located here at Pier 21. And also I would probably venture to say that Propeller would be my third pick as well. Propeller has been around for decades in our area. So yeah, those are great beers.
Some of our members are going to stick around this week, so if they haven't had an opportunity to try those yet, perhaps they'll do that in the days ahead.
That's right.
So we're not going to have an opportunity for audience Q&A today, although we have a live audience with us today. So I have solicited some questions from GGC members in advance and done my best to incorporate those in our conversation today.
Okay.
The theme of our conversation is around food in flux and the challenges that Canada's agriculture sector is going to face over the next 5 years. I appreciate having this conversation with you, Sylvain, because I think you're known for your candor. So you've indicated that no topic is off the table. So we'll dive into a few, I think, very interesting topics, but I want to start by setting the stage. In your view, what are the challenges, maybe the top 3 challenges facing Canada's agriculture sector over the next 5 years?
I'd say, the one thing that really concerns me a lot is this struggle for power in terms of understanding agriculture, understanding the role of agri-food in our lives. Things have changed the last 3 years with COVID and now conflicts in different parts of the world. It's getting people to think differently about food. And in the middle of all that are power struggles. And I can think of 2 situations that are really contradictory when it comes to farmers in the world. If you look at the Netherlands, what's going on in the Netherlands right now with the nitrogen situation, there you clearly see farmers not having enough power. They're not being listened to. On the other side of the spectrum, here in Canada, you have some milk waste in Quebec because of a strike, and you see some farmers having too much power, and that lack of balance, I think, is missing, and that's due to the fact that we're just weaponizing science a whole lot, which is polarizing, I think, the population, in my view. That's the one thing. The second thing is the protein play. Both you and I, we spoke about this, and as a lab, we do look into what's going on with proteins, what the future is with proteins, and you guys are very much involved with that at Farmgate. What are people going to be eating? Is it going to be meat? What's the future of meat? I'm actually releasing a book in the fall on the protein revolution, looking at animal, vegetable-based proteins, looking at cultured meat as well. Precision fermentation, replacing dairy protein. I just got a nice sample of cheese from Israel the other day at home. Came from a plant in Tel Aviv. No cows, no dairy protein. My wife put cream cheese, regular cream cheese, Philadelphia cream cheese, on one cracker. The Remilk, that's the company, Remilk cream cheese on another cracker. Tasted the same exact thing, same texture. I got to tell you, it was just amazing. It was unbelievable. So those are the things that are happening right now. And if you ask me in 10, 15, 20 years from now, how will the protein market look like? I don't know, but it's not going to look like how it looks like today. I can tell you, because things are changing quite rapidly. So those are, I would say, those are the top two things that are that we're watching very closely. Yeah.
I want to come back and talk a bit more about the weaponization of science and the use of social media, because that was a part of the conversation that you and I had the other day as well. But first,
Yeah.
I want to talk a bit about some of the conversations that we've been having here as a group over the last couple of days. And that is this assumption, if you will, that there has been this shift politically away from evidence-based, science-based policy. And I think domestically, we can point to one very clear example. And I'd like to know if you think this is any indication that things are changing domestically. But you look at what happened last August with the, what we call political interference, and what was a science-based decision by Health Canada around glyphosate, maximum residue limits. And the government's decision to make a change there. So I would like to know if you think that's any indication of us seeing a major shift here in Canada, but also what you think is happening internationally, especially as far as the EU is concerned and their farm to fork strategy.
I'm a social scientist, and what I'm looking at right now is a marketplace which believes that science is negotiable. I would say, we often say that science is being weaponized, and what I mean by that is that we often believe that science is an absolute, and it's not. Science is an evolution. It's about discovery, and what is true today may not be true tomorrow. And the public doesn't really understand that, I don't think. And so some groups take advantage of that. They think, well, there's a report that came out last year, it must be true. That's really what science is. Science doesn't prove anything. It allows you to evolve. That's what science is really in the end. And so what I'm seeing right now are a lot of groups, even I would say to a certain extent, government. They actually treat science like a buffet. Oh, I like this, but I don't like that. Let's bring up an argument against this or for that. That is, and so it goes back to my first concern, the politics of food. That's what I'm seeing. This misunderstanding of science is unbelievably dangerous right now. And I think what's going on in Europe is exactly that. And in Canada, with the glyphosate situation, just last week, we kind of dodged a bullet with Health Canada and the labeling of meat. That's another misunderstanding of science. And it was treated like a buffet at Health Canada. We've dealt with Health Canada and they're against meat. I met some people and they believe that their job is to save the world from itself. They believe that because we don't know best, government knows best. Health Canada is there to really dictate what is good and not so good for Canadians to eat. And it's happening because science is treated like a buffet.
So maybe I want to unpack that particular point for a moment, because you and I also talked a bit about this, and that was the announcement that was made from Health Canada about front of packaging labeling for ground beef in particular. Yep. They indicated due to high fat content. So they made this announcement, and then it seemed like within days they reversed their decision. So can you talk a bit about, from an advocacy perspective, as a national association who advocates on behalf of grain farmers across the country, I always take a keen interest on how some of this is, what's happening behind the scenes for a decision like that to essentially be reversed in what felt like a matter of days. Can you talk a bit about that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it didn't happen by accident. A couple of months ago, I got a phone call. I was in Toronto at a meeting and got a phone call from the Canadian Meat Council. And they informed me of what was going on in Health Canada with the front of package labeling policy. There was an announcement coming up, and their concern was that ground meat was not exempt, while dairy was. And I was concerned because I saw, when you understand the economics of food retail, and in fact, this afternoon I have a seminar. Online about food retail. If you actually label ground meat as having too much fat, you're basically eliminating ground meat from the market. No grocer will want to carry a product labeled as unhealthy. There's too much space, and space in a grocery store is real estate. They're going to be selling that space as something else. That's how it works. So you may have seen you would see extra lean ground beef or pork or whatever, but that product is way more expensive. And at an inflation rate of 10%, consumers would lose big time, and industry would lose big time. So I got concerned, and so at the time, the CMC said, you know what, we're going to send out a press release condemning this potential decision from Health Canada, and we'd like to mention your name in the press release, Sylvain, if you don't mind, suggesting media to call you if they have any questions. And what I said to Amy Peck at the CMC, I said, don't do that. Don't do that. You're the messenger, and you're the industry. It's not going to work. Let me handle it. So what I did, basically, I made a few phone calls, wrote a very solid op-ed, both in English and French, a little bit different because the Quebec market is a bit different when it comes to meat. But both op-eds were published everywhere, opening up the door to a debate because nobody was talking about it. Nobody cares about meat labeling until you actually tell them why they should care. And the op-ed didn't talk about the industry. The op-ed talked about meat prices. The op-ed talked about, food democracy and traditions and gastronomy and things that really speak to consumers. We didn't talk about, saving the cattle industry. I hate to say this, but, the shoppers out there struggling in a grocery store won't necessarily care about the farmer necessarily, but right now they really care about their pocketbook. So it got to them, did I don't know how many interviews on a debate that media probably didn't know existed. And then the Cattlemen's Association came in with their don't label my beef thing, which I signed personally, and it worked. And that's how it got reversed, basically. That's behind the scenes. And the lesson there for me, and I've done this countless of times throughout my career. I've been doing this for 25 years. But when I sit down with, say, Crop Life, and Emily and I don't know, where's I was talking to Emily before coming in, and I mean, these are the kinds of things we need to do more because, some groups are seen as biased, and the messenger is really an important thing to consider. I'm an academic. I'm not funded by industry at all. I take money from SSHRC. I take money from the province or a few provinces, and that's it. I don't take money from the private sector. So people can look me up. They can FOIPOP me. They can FOIPOP the lab. We're not compromised.
So having that third-party perspective then weigh into the debate you felt was probably something that moved the needle.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that the Cattlemen's Association really came in at the right time into the debate just to give that debate a second win. And it worked. It worked really well. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think that on June 30th last week, if it wasn't for that call from Amy to me 2 months ago, I don't think that the decision would have been reversed. No.
So I want to talk about some other forums for advocacy and an opportunity to influence government policy. So this government in particular has established a number of committees and task forces. And I wanted to ask—
Do you know how many?
I don't know how many.
I think we're up to 8 now.
And that's specifically under Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada alone.
related to ag. So
Related
some
to.
of it is under ag, but some of it actually affects ag as well. Like the labor task force is not just ag, but it's related. There's so many, like the food council.
That's the one I wanted to ask you about in particular. I mean,
Yeah.
the effectiveness, I think, more broadly of these task forces and the extent to think that you think we ought to be leveraging them. I'll be honest, I really haven't heard a lot about what some of these groups are doing. But in particular, I wanted to ask you about the Canadian Food Policy Advisory Council that was
Yeah.
struck about a year and a half ago. I think
Yes.
we have 2 farmers on that council.
Yes.
I think Mary Robinson, the president of CFA, and I think there was a farmer from Western Canada, I think maybe in BC in particular, who sits on that council. What have they been up to over the last year and a half on that in particular, but I think more broadly on these task forces? How
Yeah.
effective are they for organizations and associations like ours to try to influence government policy?
There's not much on the website, I can tell you that. They haven't really released any report, but the 2 co-chairs of the council are 2 good friends of mine, Evan Fraser out of Guelph.
Mhm.
I used to be in Guelph, a good friend, and Sylvie Cloutier, who's the president of the CETAC in Quebec.
Mhm.
So I actually met both of them for coffee in Toronto a few weeks ago. So what I know is that there's been 5 resignations so far, and they haven't released any reports at all in 2 years. So, and they've struggled. They've struggled because there's a lot of people around the table with different point of views. Labor's involved. I mean, when you look at the membership, it's so diverse that it's hard to come up with anything as substantial. And so they've been struggling for sure. And yeah, there's a lot of frustration around that council. But again, it boils down to creating committees, creating task force without really focusing on specific outcomes. So I met the other day Jean Gattuso, who's chairing the task force on transportation logistics for Canada. That's not under ag, but it will affect ag, obviously.
Mhm.
And he's been tasked with this mandate, but I don't know what's going to come out. I have no idea. But we do have a government really, which is good at creating bodies, creating governance without really making progress, I don't think, unfortunately.
I ask because they can be rather time consuming. And so you
Oh.
think about when you have limited resources, where as an advocacy
And
association, you should be
they've
spending
been
most of
meeting
your
a
time.
lot. They've been meeting a lot, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe before I do want to talk about transportation and logistics. We did get a question from our members on that, as you can well imagine. But I want to go back briefly to a point that you made earlier around the weaponization of science and the use of social media in particular, because so many of the folks in this room and those watching in the sector love to use social media.
Yep.
And so let's talk a bit about the role that social media can play in the weaponization of science.
Oh, it's powerful. It's powerful. Well, it's powerful, but it can go both ways, right? That's the nature of social media. You can't really filter the you can't validate the information, the data on social media. The other day, I got a phone call from a farmer group, from our province here, and it's the Nova Scotia Horticulture Group. And there is this one farmer who has been undercutting everyone else, selling strawberries at a very, very low price. And farmers in the valley are just amazing people, but they were upset, clearly upset. So the executive director of the association calls me up and said, "Listen, Sylvain, we got a undercutter. He's killing our industry. It's been going on for a few years. We need to get out there. I think you can do it through social media." So I said, "Okay, all right. So you want me to go on social media and denounce this one person who's undercutting strawberry price, like offering basically strawberries at a discount when food inflation is at 10%. How does that work? Wouldn't you think that in a second on social media, maybe people would think of your members as being gougers just for a second? It can go both ways, right? So that's why with social media, you got to be really careful, because it can switch I'm sure some of you are on social media. You've seen that most of the time. You're in a very intense debate and things can just shift in a second. That's the difference between reality real politics, and social media. And you just need one powerful voice to reverse everything. And I've made mistakes on social media because not reading the room properly. But when you've been doing it for 20 years, you kind of have an idea of how things will turn out. The Nova Scotia Horticulture Association just didn't have a case, a sellable case. I totally understand their frustration, and I agree with them. I mean, either buy him out or set up a marketing board or just wait until he runs out of strawberries. But if he doesn't run out of strawberries, then you may actually have a food fraud problem because he's not selling Nova Scotia strawberries. You got to look into that. That's your field. That's your battle right there. And you don't need the public.
And I get how that's a challenge for an association, because very often you're trying to read the room in terms of public perception on a particular issue, the direction in which you want your members to go, and how the government might perceive some of that messaging. So.
And it's frustrating for farmers because farmers are price takers. They're not in control of the market. They don't control anything, really, not even the weather, of course. So I can understand where they're coming from. And it's always hard to know what's beatable, like what are the fights you should choose. It's very tough.
Can we win this one right now?
And you're not going to win all of them. You just can't. The label one, I knew we could win. I knew we could win.
And the timing was right.
And the time was right. Context is a big deal too. Mm-hmm. Context is a big deal too. If you care about an issue, don't think that everyone cares about this issue, that same issue. But you have to think about context. Is the time right to come out? Whether it's an election cycle, the economy, some crisis going on, like the milk dumping in Quebec. To me, was a great opportunity to come out and say, supply management. And I know you may have some views about the SM5s. I'm supportive of the quota system personally, but I've been critical of the system because I don't think we're using it to our advantage. We're allowing, we're dumping 100 million to 300 million liters of milk a year. How is that possible with supply management? In the U.S., I can understand, but we're producing what we need in Canada. How is this acceptable? We actually have a plant in Kingston, Ontario, processing our own milk and shipping all that milk to China right now. How is that acceptable? The public, most people don't know this. My job is to allow people to know this.
I'm going to switch gears for a moment. One of the questions that we got from our members was around supply chains, as you can well imagine.
Yeah.
And I think the pandemic has made us hyper-focused on the functionality of supply chains. So I'd like to know from your perspective, how much of what we're experiencing currently is sort of existed pre-pandemic? How much of this has since been exacerbated by the pandemic? And what impact is this having on our reputation? I mean, you've got in the room here and watching Canadian farmers across the country who, depending on the commodity, 80% of what you grow is moving into international markets. So to what extent are these challenges having an impact on our international reputation?
Well, so this winter I was actually at the University of South Florida for 5 months on an exchange. So we spent the winter in Florida, in Tampa Bay, and I was visiting scholar at the University of South Florida. And there was a conference in Tampa Bay called Phosphate 2022. And I was asked to speak to American investors about Canada, because I'm Canadian. So they asked me to talk to them about what was going on with fertilizers, with transportation in Canada, days before the CP Rail lockout, and there was, of course, the convoy that impacted the Windsor Bridge. And so I was talking to the investor. I tried to be as positive as possible, Aaron. I was very, positive, but over lunch. So my talk was just before lunch. So over lunch, it was like a walking lunch. Like you didn't sit at a table, you just walked around. People came to me, and I got to tell you, our reputation around transportation is just bad. It's just not good. Canada does not, and this winter made things worse. the blockades, the lockouts. We just had a strike with another railroad. It's just not good. We're not taking logistics very seriously in this country at all. It should be an essential service. We should invest way more than what we're doing right now to make sure that we can not only make sure that our economy goes well. It's the backbone of our economy. And we treat it like it's just a vein.
What more should the federal government be doing in this space?
Have a vision, maybe. I mean, I remember when I was in Saskatchewan, when I started my career, there was this Gateway and Corridor initiative. That was a vision. It led to a lot of investments. It led to external investments. We don't have to spend all of our money. We should make Canada attractive for investors abroad. And we work with PIC in Regina with Bill Grewal, who's a former student of mine. The Proteins and Trees Canada, I'm a fan of the supercluster. I'm not sure what you guys think about the supercluster, but I actually do think that the supercluster has done some good for the West in particular, because it has brought more attention to the sector. It's brought more investments as well. Many companies have actually invested in that space in the last little while, especially in processing. And this is what we need. But you can't really attract more investment without supporting that backbone, which is this Gateway and Corridor. The most votes supporting the current government are in Ontario and Quebec. They've taken logistics for granted because of the St. Lawrence Seaway. The St. Lawrence Seaway has always been there. It's cheap to move things on water. Out west, there is no St. Lawrence Seaway. You got to think about it. You need a strategy. You need to build infrastructure. From Winnipeg, Churchill, Saskatoon, Regina, Calgary, Edmonton, Prince George, and of course, Vancouver. You got to be strategic about moving products westward, because that's where the money is for the next 20, 30 years. We all know that.
We can't talk about agriculture politics, I think, in Eastern Canada without talking about the tariffs that have recently been applied to fertilizer and the impact that that's had on the farmers in this region. I think both in terms of their ability to access the product, but the price they're paying for it. What do you think the government should be doing with respect to the tariffs that have been applied to fertilizer?
Guess what I think they should do?
I'd like to know.
Well, the thing, I mean, I've expressed my concerns about that for a very long time, since the start of the conflict. I think, I mean, we're mixing geopolitics with food security here, but I think food security should win all the time. And if you allow food security to win, you have to support farmers as much as possible. Tariffs have to go.
So this has been, I think, a priority for the Canadian government, because they've talked about some of the work that they're doing in the Ukraine specifically, right, to improve food security. They're cognizant of the impact that it's having.
Yeah.
So what extent do you think to which they're going to be willing to reverse those tariffs, or to offer any other form of rebate, or what could that look like? What do you think they're willing to do for Canadian farmers in Eastern Canada?
Well, for our production cycle, it's too late for this year, but you have to think about the winter and the spring right now. Like, you got to plan for next year right away, and the conflict is not going to end. I think we're going to see a key region being impacted by war for a long time. So that's the reality that we have to accept. So knowing that and accepting that, you kind of have to really come up with policies to empower farmers to grow as much as possible. I don't know if you saw the report from Stats Canada yesterday. We're actually growing more wheat. We're planted more wheat this year. It's a record. We're up in corn, but I think everything else we're down. And so positive. So I think we're up 8%. Which is good news. So we've put money into the ground. If Mother Nature cooperates, we should be okay. But that's a big if compared to what happened last year. But Canada is expected to step up, and in order to step up, you really need to get out of the way so farmers can put more money into the ground and increase yields as much as possible, which is not happening, unfortunately, right now. We have a government fascinated with the with the object of making agriculture greener, and that's it. There's no word around efficiencies, no effort around efficiency or increasing yields altogether. Spending 5 months in the U.S., Aaron, I'm afraid to say I'm pretty convinced now that, and I think all of you know this, Canada doesn't matter around the world, really. We're just an afterthought, really. And that's a problem. I think we should do more. The report, the Barton report a few years ago, you remember that? What was in that report? Ag was right in there.
High potential sector.
Seeing ag as a potent place to invest, to grow our economy, to export more. And I know you'll be talking about exports after this. That's a vision. I really like that report. There was so many good things in that report, and we kind of forgot about it. And I'm sure that just by mentioning the Barton report, you probably said, "Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that was a few years ago." The government clearly forgot about that, and he was the former ambassador of China under the Liberals.
So maybe before I ask you our final question, what more could we be doing as an association, as a sector, and what's the role for government then in sort of elevating the Canadian position on the international stage?
Well, you're doing a lot already, to be honest. It's just, I think it's more, you need to get to the public. This is a very populous, urban-centric government we have in Canada. So you kind of have to speak that language. So you have to really link whatever you're doing to urbanites as much as possible. Urbanize everything you do, and I think you'll be able to move the needle a little bit more. But what you're doing, and I've seen some of your reports, and you have partners in the room right now, and some of the reports were amazing. No audience. That's the problem. So if you want to move the needle, you kind of have to figure out a way to really get to use a language that it will resonate with the public in general. The people walking into a grocery store, going to restaurants, figuring out what they're going to do next when they pay their bills, and you really have to make it real for them as much as possible. That's the era we're in right now.
So along that vein, this is my final question for you. The Grain Growers of Canada launched their Road to 2050 initiative, which would essentially see it's an effort to help the sector reach net zero by 2050. And this is our attempt to sort of align some of our environmental objectives with those of the Canadian government, demonstrate alignment there, and work over the next, I think, 8 months to determine sort of what is the path to net zero by 2050. So my question for you on this is, as we do this work, as we consider the role for Canadian grain farmers, as we consider the role for the federal government, what advice would you have for us in terms of what you think ought to be in that roadmap? What should we, as a group, be thinking about when we develop that?
Be accountable and clear on metrics. There's a lot of accusation of greenwashing out there, a lot of skepticism. That skepticism is absolutely real. There's been many misses over the last several years. Seeing companies, sectors saying we're going to get green, we're going to become the carbon neutral, and people have doubts. But some companies have actually done it right. In my view, I think McCain is one of them. They just recently released, I don't know if you guys saw that, but they released a plan to make potato growing more sustainable in Canada over the next, well, not just in Canada, but in their system, in their network, more sustainable over the next until 2030. And if you look at, it's a one-pager, different levels, specific numbers, specific metrics farmers have to follow. They have a support system for farmers. I was actually briefed by McCain on Zoom about their plan. I was impressed. One page, easy to understand, numbers, objectives, targets. You make it public. People can look at it all the time, like a dashboard. That's what you need to do as much as possible. An announcement is fine. Carbon neutral by 2050. That's great. Dairy farmers did the same thing, but people will expect performance metrics. Use them and abuse them.
Thank you. I appreciate your perspective on that as we undertake this important work on behalf of the sector. And with that, thank you very much for being my guest today on this very special episode here with the Grain Growers of Canada Board of Directors and members from across the country as we go live. And our next fireside chat will be in about 2 weeks' time. We have an opportunity to sit down with Deputy Minister Chris Forbes. Until then, thank you very much for listening.